The planets have aligned, and once again, the prophecy has come true. That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink Podcast. With me, your host, Uncle Paddy, joined every week by twin brother and spare parts bin, Andy the asshole.
Woo! Come on
And
now.
of course, we couldn't do any of this without being joined by the philosopher king himself, the sage, back with full philosophical firepower, Stevie Tel Aviv. This week, we will be discussing OpenAI's new Codex model and how that impacts the software engineering world. We're going to be discussing an amazing new voice API agent, VAPI, for Agentic voice workloads. And then finally, we're going to be talking about the Scottish space industry and more
didn't even know there was
specifically
one.
satellites. Well, we know Scotland's got space cadets, but
World leaders.
no
World
shortage of
leaders.
them. But do they actually do anything in the satellite business? So we're back. It's episode 17. It's been another frantic week of incredible weather. So before we get into the docket, boys, what's been happening this week?
And a frantic week of you gallivanting about the country again, Stephen.
I have to say, we would probably all agree there is nowhere better in the world than Scotland in the sunshine.
Yes.
And I had the most fabulous trip up to the Isle of Skye. One thing, the roads are freaking chock-a-block
Yes.
with
Yes.
tourists, camper vans and people. But once you get past all of that, Skye in the sunshine was just sublime. We went to Portree, had fish suppers on the beach. We went to Torvaig, went kayaking, saw my beautiful family. So
I mean, you're on that stunning white Caribbean beach that they've got up there.
we actually walked toward one of the many beaches. We got bored. We sat down, smoked cigars, ate crisps and chocolate biscuits, and did what we all love doing, which is eating and analysing our genetic
so you're now-
defects.
You're now the Andrew Tate of Skye.
And what about the midges? Any midges at night time?
Here's the thing. On a lovely day when the wind drops, the midges are
Ferocious,
vile.
yeah.
But as long as a breeze blowing, the little things cannot hold a satellite position.
Did you do the fairy pools?
We didn't have time. I mean, literally, you could be in Skye for a week and there's just not enough time.
That was my abiding memory about Skye. We went to the fairy pools through the day and it was glorious. So it's these almost like fairy type lagoons as you head up the mountain, and they're kind of staggered. So the further up you go, there's like 10 of them. There's people swimming in them. And in the sunshine with a nice stiff breeze, you don't have any midges, but as you're heading back down the mountain and the sun drops, we were eaten alive.
Well, good for you too. Well, you've been gallivanting all over the Shire. I've been in the boiler room, stuck at the coalface, hawking bands in every country in every corner of the country. So not just quite as an exciting week as you two.
Well, somebody's got to pay for Stephen and I's expenses.
Exactly.
It might as well be you. All right, let's get into the docket. So first thing we're going to talk about this week is OpenAI have released a new coding model called Codex. So this is one for the geeks and the nerds. I'm going to try and keep it as high level as possible, although I do usually fail miserably at that. So what's the big deal about Codex? Well, AI, as we know, has been able to code very well for a very long time. It actually does that better than it does anything else. And I think that's where we've seen the most progress in AI development is in code generation. But it only solves one part of the overall software development problem, which is generating code.
Yeah.
And the software development problem is much bigger than that. So if you were to create a virtual software agent, so to replace a software developer with a virtual software developer, it would do much more than code. It would be able to access all the code bases that it needed access to. It would be able to reason across them. It would be able to fix things and then submit things like pull requests to repositories like GitHub so that people could approve the code and deploy it to production. So the software problem is much bigger than just writing code, and that's what they've attempted to solve.
So just quickly, Paddy,
With this
can you
new-
explain what a pull request is, for example?
Yeah, so most code for most companies is managed in a software service called GitHub. So if you're in the coding business, you're in the software business,
You're developing in GitHub.
You're developing locally, and then you're pushing your changes to GitHub. So GitHub stores your code repository and then manages all the changes to that code repository. So if there's 10 developers working on a team and you're all writing code and you're deploying it to GitHub, GitHub figures what code came in from who and what changes did everybody make, and let's make sure those changes don't conflict with other people's changes, right? It's a code. Sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
No, it's like a project manager, an automated project manager for software.
Yeah, it's code control, basically. Cool. It's change control for code. And so that's where the world manages their software, inside GitHub. So what's different about Codex is that Codex, the first thing it does, it connects to your GitHub account and it discovers all your code repositories. So now it has access to your code base. So let's localize this to a very near and dear example. Andy has a website, and the code for that website, let's say, is sitting in a GitHub repository. Okay, and Andy has one developer who makes changes to that code. And when he does that, he writes code on his laptop and then he commits it to GitHub.
Publishes the code to GitHub. In a bigger team of more than one developer, there's much more opportunity for conflict. So if you have 10 guys working on the same code base, how do you make sure they're not actually making changes to the same files and overwriting each other's work? That's basically why GitHub exists, to iron out that problem. It's a software solution that stands over that conflict problem. So let's take Andy's hypothetical example and let's imagine that he had 5 developers. So now 5 people are contributing code to his website, adding features, fixing bugs, changing the design. Well, at that point, he would need something like GitHub to manage all that potential conflict. So where Codex differs from other coding engines is it's going to basically solve all of those problems in one solution. So what does it do? It drafts GitHub pull requests. So a pull request is when you give something to GitHub that you want to contribute to it. Mm-hmm. That pull request would normally, in the standard software development lifecycle, go to a colleague who would then review your work before merging your code into the production code base. That's how it kind of works in normal companies. Now, when guys like me are running development teams and development teams are busy cranking out customer requirements, the things that get left behind are the following. So slowly but surely, your code base gets old and it gets stale. And packages go out of date. In frameworks, you're on Laravel 13.1.2, but the current version's 14.3.6. And you're getting left behind. And with each of these updates, there's important bug fixes, performance improvements that in an ideal world that you would keep up with. Same for databases, right? You're on MySQL 8.0, but the latest version that's supported by AWS is 8.4. 8.0 is about to be deprecated. AWS sends you an email telling you won't be able to commit changes to your database in 3 months' time. Then you have to abandon all your feature development and put 4 engineers for 3 months on upgrading the database from 8.0 to 8.4. So there's a whole bunch of maintenance and background without crashing
work
everything in the process,
that gets left behind that you end up dealing with as a crisis, usually when the cloud provider deprecates the version of the software you're on. And they do that specifically as a forcing function to get you to keep up to date. And every development team hates it and it sucks. So things like Codex can solve this, right? Now, the really cool thing about Codex is you just fire off tasks, it stores them as background processes, and it can run as many of these things in parallel as you like. So let me try and bring this to life for you and give you some practical examples. So as a developer, you could literally create a scheduled task and say, this Saturday, Codex, wake up at 6 a.m., connect to the code base, work your way through the code base and find as many bugs as you could possibly find within this budget. I'm giving you 4 hours to find bugs and fix them. Then create the pull requests that would then deploy those, that will then be sitting in my inbox on Monday morning that I can review and deploy to production. That is literally an unbelievable improvement. And one of the guys I was watching on YouTube kind of calls it paper cuts, like code bases are full of paper cuts. Things, you see things, they're annoying, but you're trying to crank out a miserable customer requirement on a deadline, so you kind of leave it behind. So it's a paper cut in the centre. It's irritating, but it's not going to cost you to have your arm amputated, right? It's just a little scratch. And code bases are full of these things, and they get left behind. So this is a fully autonomous agent that can identify things, fix things, document where it fixed it, test where it fixed to make sure it doesn't break the code base, and then deploy to your GitHub account as a pull request ready for you just to approve.
So does it have its own environment where it can, does it have its own script running environment where it can test the code?
It's got its own compute environment where it's running its own code, running tests, and making sure that before it goes ahead and generates a pull request, things are working properly. I cannot tell you how profound this is for software developers. This is like the holy grail. Now, let me give you another example. Andy's got a website. There's a code base behind it.
To come back to
Picking on Andy.
Because I don't have any websites.
And he's got a software developer that stands over it. But it's only one guy, so he's got the hit by a bus problem, right? So if his
Please don't get hit by a bus, Alan.
So if Alan gets hit by a bus, there's nobody waiting in the wings to figure out how Andy's website hangs together. And certainly not you, Stephen. And contrary to popular belief, it's actually super difficult for a software developer to pick up another software developer's work and just, take it forward.
Because the documentation generally isn't clear enough. The repositories there's no good enough demarcation and separation.
There's nothing well structured. There's nothing, like over time, code bases become hairballs, and only the guy that really made the hairball knows how the hairball works. Right. For the first time ever, Andy could very quickly be in a position where if he had hit the bus problem from Alan, he could connect something like Codex to his code base and ask it to understand the code base, report back on what it found, identify any obvious issues and bugs and problems that need to be remediated, write the solutions for that and deploy them. All of a sudden, he's got a lifeline there rather than being left stranded if he gets the hit by a bus problem. So go ahead, Stephen.
No. So I probably know the answer to this one, but I think it's a question worth asking. So take the last scenario, Alan's gone down. I know that the accuracy of AIs, particularly in programs, is incredibly high. But how much of this stuff is able to run with effectively no software management, and for how long? Is this going to replace a person?
No, it's not designed to replace people. So the best metaphor to use to think about this is the airline pilot. So in a transatlantic flight from London to New York of 7.5 hours, how much flying does the pilot actually do?
20 minutes, 25
10 minutes on the takeoff, 10 minutes on the landing, and the plane flies the rest of the journey on autopilot.
A lot of looking over the systems during the thing to keep them in.
So it's a trust.
Precisely.
It's a trust but verify model.
Right.
Okay. Now the pilot knows how to fly the plane. He knows every system on the plane. He's been trained on every system on the plane. He knows how to take over if the systems malfunction, but he almost never does that. And the plane, for the overwhelming majority of a transatlantic flight, flies itself with the pilot monitoring. This is a perfect metaphor for what it will be like to be a software developer in the future. They know how to develop software. They know how to fix bugs. They know how to take over from the system when it screws up, but they won't have to do that the overwhelming majority of the time, but they will never become unnecessary.
So take that one just one stage forward of that analogy, because I think it's a great analogy, because with you could literally have a plane take off and land itself. So if you are prepared to take a small enough system, a system with maybe not so large consequentials if it crashes, you could literally leave the Codex to run the whole thing for a period of time.
You could, but I would say that in a production level SaaS product, the consequences of that crashing are just as bad as running a plane into a building, because if it goes down, or let's say the agent goes rogue and rewrites the whole code base and commits it and destroys the product, the company could go out of business.
Yeah.
And so the pilot monitoring is a great metaphor for what it's going to look like to be a software engineer in the very near future. They won't go away. They'll still be required, but they'll offload the heavy lifting. Think about the pilot workload. If all the automated systems in the plane stop working, right, the yaw damper, the amount of rudder input that would be required at all times just to keep the plane flying straight. All these things that the plane's doing, the automated systems that's keeping it on the straight and narrow, massively reduces the pilot workload. this is what's going to happen in software development. It's going to reduce the hands-on time on the controls for the software developers, but they'll always be required to monitor.
Yeah, I don't have any kind of aeronautical thing to tag on to that, but what I was going to ask in a very practical sense, so if you look at our platform, it's now 17 years of iteration on the original design, with a couple of architecture changes along the way. I'm absolutely sure during that time, despite Alan's best efforts and working really hard on the product, that there'll be elements of that are a bit janky and a bit kind of stitched together with blue tack. In terms of, give me some idea of context window. Could I upload the entire Coast platform onto Codex? Or could Alan upload the entire Coast platform?
So you're failing to understand at the first level. You don't upload anything.
Right.
You connect Codex to your code base, and
right.
your code base is already living in GitHub.
Got
right?
it.
You're not uploading anything to
so there's no concept to uploading. You're just pointing
connecting
Codex.
it, and then it has the full context of the code base.
Right.
And then can reason across it, write new code, fix bugs, improve things, document features that aren't already documented, could do all that stuff.
So this is the things that really separate it from these other kind of vibe coding kind of platforms that you see in these other kind of major model LLMs.
Exactly. And then the other thing, so I've come up with a few scenarios here because I think practical examples help bring these things to life. So if you're a software developer, you're an important part of the team, you built this part of the product, for whatever reason it fails, and you're on a cruise ship, and you never took your laptop. That has happened to me 20 fucking times, minimum. I cannot tell you the amount of times that that's happened to me. And then we phone John Hood and we're trying to get him on the telephone and we're trying to get him a good enough internet connection. Then he tells us he's not brought his laptop. Now we're trying to fucking rent him a laptop. What John Hood could do with Codex is he could go in on his phone, open the Codex app, not the company app or any of that stuff, the Codex app, and say, customers reported this problem. It's in this part of the code base. Here's what I think the remediation is. Go ahead and make that change and then submit a pull request so somebody back at the office can verify it and commit it. Game changer. Total game changer. Just by pulling out his phone.
Quick security question.
Mm-hmm.
Could somebody theoretically take a platform site? Like, what are the permissions in terms of accessing the code base? Can they basically reverse engineer a platform by pointing Codex to it and say, basically recreate this?
Totally. I think that actually might be one of the biggest enterprise use cases. So the world runs on these 30-year-old COBOL systems, okay, that we can't kill them. They don't seem to die. Well, if you could connect a tool like Codex to a 35-year-old COBOL ERP system and say,
let's give it the problem.
Here's the database. Here's all the code. Figure out what it's doing and recreate this in Swift. Recreate it in Scala or Go or Python, a modern language. Oh, and by the way, right now it's set up to be an on-premise solution. Rewrite it to be run on the cloud.
And of course,
we're heading to a future where things like that are going to be possible. And that might be the only hope for legacy enterprise software. It might be the only way to recreate it.
But it could also starch the competitive advantage out of a lot of businesses where everything's just commoditized.
It's already happened. That's the 80-20, was it Chamath, the 80-20 thing. And of course, you also have these fascinating programmers who are COBOL programmers. Yeah. And they exist only because of this legacy
to
software.
Maintain this legacy.
So you've got another level of people that will suddenly become
redundant.
So the important thing to understand is when you're looking at the COBOL interface, you just have a ChatGPT type chat box. You fire off an instruction, it creates a task, and you see that it's working on the task and it's in progress. Then you fire off another one, and another one, and another one. You could have 68 tasks running simultaneously, solving problems, identifying bugs, reporting back, writing new features, all happening at the same time. Writing all these pull requests to GitHub. So every time I say pull requests, just think of a developer saying, right, boss, I'm done with this. What do you think? Okay.
And of course, when you could do it with something like programming, which we already know is the best use case for AI at the moment, actually that discussion, that type of scenario, then just floods out to every other management work process. So actually, you're only then one step away from law, teaching,
100%,
project management.
Let's say you're like us, right? So when I was running a company for the first few years anyway, we're so busy crunching out customer requirements. When we wrote a feature, it's best practice to then write the unit tests for that feature. And then every time you deploy your code, as part of deploying that, you run a series of tests that identify if the code's going to work or if it's broken. Almost no companies at the small level, until they become medium and large companies, do that testing. You could go back to the code base and say, retrospectively go and write hundreds of tests for these features that we built years ago, and then run the tests every time we deploy and here's the acceptance criteria and make sure that it passes that before we deploy any new features. So things you would never have got back to will all be the things you'll be able to backfill and cover with these new technologies, as well as writing new features and functionality. So developers will never go away, but they'll become prompt monkeys. It will be more important that they can actually write the appropriate prompts rather than have to then build the code itself.
Terrifying and amazing in equal measure. Everything is now going to be so easily ripped off. Nothing will be proprietary. Everything will be commoditized.
But not nearly as terrifying as what you're going to show us next.
So, we'll wrap this up. So by the time most people hear this podcast, I actually think Google will release their version of this tomorrow,
right,
at their Google I/O conference. Because don't forget, none of these guys do anything in isolation, right? We're in the photocopying stage of AI right now. The minute somebody launches a service, the other two big guys have their version of that ready to go within a week. Yeah. And so what you see is an incredible multiplication. I think Sachs said it best on the previous episode of the All In podcast, where he said, if you think about how exponential math works, you have the algorithms themselves improving at something like 3 to 4x a year. The chips themselves are improving at 3 to 4x a year. And then the amount of chips in circulation is improving by 3 to 4x a year. That's 10x every 2 years. And because of how exponential math works, that's now 20x in 4 years. It's 100x in 4 years. So in the next 4 years, you've got 100x improvement in the algorithm, 100x improvement on the chips, and 100x improvement in the amount of available chips. That adds up to 1,000,000x improvement in capability.
Not 1,000,000%, 1,000,000 times.
Yeah. Something that's already very useful and very already super helpful at making
capable.
You productive.
Yeah.
So that everybody betting against this trend, it's like, in 1,000,000x from where we're right now as a baseline, what won't be possible rather than what will be possible would be a much easier question to answer. All right, there we go. We've geeked out. The developers are rejoicing and full body orgasms about tech orgasms about Codex AI. But there's more, because now we're moving on to VAPI. Andy, tell us about VAPI.
So we show up here every week and we espouse and fulminate about the pace of innovation in AI. And nowhere is AI accelerating faster than in agentic voice and voice agents. And I've been playing with a product in the last week or so that's made me really believe that we've hit a breakthrough level now where entrepreneurs can actually reach the holy grail of basically being able to create a synthetic salesperson that's natural, conversational, highly skilled, and can actually go out at scale and sell the products and services at the fraction of a physical salesperson. So before, and that product's called VAPI, Voice API. And so before I go in to speak about some of the features that I believe make it unique and a breakthrough in terms of the previous generation of voice agents that existed, I really wanted to just cover off the problem that VAPI addresses, and that is the problem of outbound manual telesales. Now, I don't know if you have, Stephen, but Paddy and I have been outbound cold callers / manual follow-up telesales people. And I can tell you from personal experience as somebody who's probably made 50,000 outbound cold calls.
It's miserable.
It is a fucking ghastly job. And it's ghastly on a number of vectors. Number one, this is what the day of a life of a cold caller looks like. You're normally tasked to make somewhere between 80 and 100 dials a day. If you work for a small business and not a call center, you're physically making those dials, typing the numbers on the keypad. you are basically being ghosted or hitting answer machines for 80+% of those calls. So you're just leaving voicemail messages.
And if you're lucky enough to get through, you're most likely getting told to fuck off.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're leaving a lot of voicemail messages to various different degrees of quality. And in the event that you do get through, for most people, you've then got the mental anguish of triaging a lot of rejection, sometimes abusive, violently abusive rejection. Fuck off, don't ever fucking phone me again. And so if you think about it...
That's what he said to me this morning.
Yes.
That's how I feel every time I see on WhatsApp, Andy Donnelly.
So imagine every
What the
day
fuck does he want?
making 100 calls to basically have 5 or 6 what we would consider productive conversations with some kind of next action at the end of them. That's the life of a cold caller. And so because of that, there's a very high turnover of staff in those industries because very few people can deal with the monotony and the rejection. And so what if you could, and by the way, there's not just the people, it's not just demoralizing for the people who are doing it, it's horribly inefficient for the people who are paying for the people to do it. Because, sorry.
No, I was going to ask a question, and maybe I'm cutting across what you're going to talk about later on. But you talk about it really in relation to sales, but I take it it's in connection with any outbound call process.
Or inbound.
Or inbound.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
just
not
think sales is a great example
Yeah.
because there's an obvious return on investment if you can make the sales element work. You can use it for customer service. You can use
Operational.
Yeah.
I need to phone 10,000 truck drivers and offer them loads that we have available as a logistics company. You know,
I think
that
it's
type
really,
of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really important because I think when you say it to people in sales, it almost is a turn off. When you say this is something that will deal with any mass call, mass information problem, whether it's advising people, updating people, it does it all.
I do like the sales example because, again, I think for businesses and entrepreneurs, they can really see the kind of the whole return on investment equation on that.
I like the sales example as well. I do. My sense of it is, but that the operational examples probably overwhelm the sales examples.
Yeah.
But I think it's easier to understand if you break it down into a cold calling. But you can imagine the furniture company that rings you up 5 days ahead of time to make sure you'll be in next Wednesday at 3 o'clock to take your sofa delivery. I mean, that is all going to move to these type of voice agents.
Or again, bring it into law, the legal business that can phone you up and actually let you know everything's okay, this is where you're at, this is normal. You know, that whole keeping people advised, which takes so much labour and it's so frustrating.
Stephen, one of the most impressive examples that I saw was a kid on YouTube who'd raised a multi-million-pound fund to buy a specific type of Rolex Daytona watch from watch dealers. And he got the voice agent with a 6th grade conversational level and almost like a Sal from Sopranos accent.
Hey, what about it?
It phoned 11 or 12,000 watch dealers across America and done 800 deals in a day, lowball deals for this Daytona watch. And the kid raised a multi-million-pound fund to buy them and flipped them and made a fortune.
So just explain a bit more about that for Stephen, because you said, tell him the detail of that, because you explained it to me and I was like, wow, that's so freaking clever.
So this kid created a voice agent and it was called Lowball. That's what it was called. And its job was to call watch dealers across America. Because remember, they're not calling the authorised Rolex store. They're watch dealers are just basically glorified pawn shops. And it had worked out the right level to speak to them at. You actually find a lot of watch dealers are pretty rough. So that kind of 6th grade, kind of New Jersey, kind of Sopranos accent turned it to be the voice that they settled on to do the calls. And this thing phones them up and it's literally like, hey, just calling to see if you got the Daytona 6185 in. And the guy's going, yeah. And he goes, box and papers? And he goes, yep. And so it's designed, it's set with parameters that it can pitch depending on the condition of that watch for a price. Mm-hmm. And then every time it negotiates a better price with the dealer, that becomes the new baseline price that goes into a spreadsheet so that when it phones the next watch dealer,
it's trying to get it cheaper.
It tries to get an improvement on that and an improvement on that and an improvement on that. And it called 11,000 dealerships and did 800 successful negotiations for Rolex Daytonas in one day. So what I'm going to do now is explain to you the kind of feature sets, the kind of capabilities that it's got, the things that make it different from the previous generation of voice agents. And it all starts with this concept of latency. So latency is the the difference in time between me asking you a question and you giving me an answer to the question, the interaction, right? That pause in between is the latency. And the reason that latency has been such a big issue with voice agents up until now is because historically, when me as the voice agent has to get a text file, turn it into audio to deliver it down the phone to you, then as you say the answer back, it has to take that audio file, turn it into text, get the LLM or the model to deliver the answer in text, turn that into an audio file for the agent to deliver it back to you. And that whole process takes time. And historically, it's taken between 1.5 and 3 seconds. And that's what makes these interactions very janky, very synthetic. Hi, Stephen, are you having a good day? Yes, I am having a good day. Thank you. And what they're trying to do is get that to a more natural conversational type of thing. So they've now got the latency down, particularly if you use any one of their 500 voices and the models that they're tuned to, they've now got that latency down to between 350 milliseconds and a second, depending on how long and how detailed the answer is. So that's a big breakthrough that is now getting these things on the cusp where you can actually use them as functional salespeople or customer service people. The next big breakthrough that they've did is what they refer to as transient-based assistant tech. So,
wow, that sounds unbelievably fucking boring.
No, but it's actually fascinating. So what they're able to do is, so let's say they were making 1,000 calls in your CRM on your behalf. So when you plug them into your CRM, what they're doing is, what the agent's doing is, as it's dialing the next number, it's looking through the customer data in the CRM. It's saying, I know this is a female. We know the age. In my case, it knows the wedding venue. It knows the date they're getting married. And then if you've got a CRM that's got notes about your previous interactions with that customer, it's taken all of that contextual information into that conversation before the customer even answers the phone. And so what that does, it gives it an incredible level of personalization, and it makes the conversation just really kind of human, a really human-like interaction that's very personalized to that person and all the interactions that they've potentially taken on your website. So big breakthrough there. One of the things it does is post-call. It's got an entire post-call protocol that it goes through, whereas it will create a full transcript to that two-way conversation. It will create a summarized version of that and then log it as a record, log it as a text file against the record in the CRM so that you can go back and review the notes that you've had with that call. And then the big hammer blow innovation at the end is it can do follow-up tasks during that conversation. So if part of my job is the virtual SDR is to book appointments for Stephen Valence Law, as it books the appointments and as it gets the person on the other end of that call to agree to the appointments, using third-party automation tools like Make.com and stuff like that, it can actually book appointments in your calendar, send you an email, update a spreadsheet,
issue the Google Meet details.
It can basically perform all the follow-up tasks as well. So I think this is amazing, providing that your product isn't overly technical or complicated. There are some products that are sufficiently technical that they really do require that kind of heavy consultative sale. But in terms of like burning through brides that have registered some interest in, for example, our bands, and then doing 500 calls, and then with the objective to try and get appointments booked with Lee on Lee's calendar for a follow-up or pass, do the first triage of 4 or 5 questions, and then pass them through to Lee if it really believes that there's a client there that's interested in doing something serious about it.
The one that came immediately to my mind was legal. Hi, we haven't seen you for 10 years. We notice your will hasn't been updated. Would it be worthwhile having a quick meeting to go through it? I mean, that would be chicken feed done in seconds. And it's not even sales. And that was my point earlier.
Yeah.
Like, for me, the whole thing about this is it's the admin stuff that's just going to take away and make so easy.
But it's consistency as well, Stephen. Think about the average customer service or sales guy. Varying degrees of enthusiasm. Sometimes your mind goes blank and you can't think what to say next. This thing has got perfect sales logic. It's got perfect recall across your product or service. It never fucks up, never fumbles its words. It never gets frustrated or gets offended if the customer's abusive. It always maintains its enthusiasm in a very human, natural way.
And at the very end of it, it transcribes "fuck off" and puts it into your CRM.
Into your
So you're
CRM.
I look forward to a dystopian future where my phone is just ringing non-stop the whole day. A guy with a container load of rubber fucking dolls from China just puts
Try to punch you them.
puts my details into a dialer.
But guys, see, before we go on, so we're going to try in a second to do a kind of technical demonstration here. Let's just cross our fingers and hope that this works. Because part of VAPI's website is they have their own voice agent on the site that can answer questions that you've got about the product or service. So we're going to try that out in a second. But the other thing that we need to touch on is the cost. So how much does it cost to put a bang average SDR on the phone? 30 grand, 40 grand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fully baked cost 30 to 40k.
VAPI will do 4,000 minutes a month for you for $300.
So when I was on the pricing calculator earlier, you could do 1,000 calls. You could do 1,000 2-minute calls for $50 a month.
Yeah.
And what we all know from our marketing experiences, that is the perfect scenario of try it, refine it, retry it until you get a model that you know is going to be banging the thing out the park every single time.
You can almost see and again, because of how you can scale this, because you can go as wide as you like, right? You can have 100 dialers all running at the same time.
You can spill 10 instances it up, yeah.
Think about time-sensitive workloads. If you're a logistics company and you've got 500 loads and you need to contact 10,000 drivers, but you need to know by the end of the day who can take the loads, maybe the only way to scale that is through
you've got a Black Friday offer that's only lasts for 48 hours, and you've got 1,000 records to get
the
through.
whole customer base with it.
Yeah.
And again, obviously, my mind also goes to the legal side of this. So many people lose business because they're not in touch with their client at the moment their client needs their assistance. Could you imagine kind of the ability to contact people on a regular basis saying, are you thinking about doing X, Y, or Z? Would you like to chat about it? And just to be the person there at that moment. No, can I dial you? Can I put you in the diary for a redial in 3 months?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then update the CRM and do all the notes and fire off all the confirmations. Yep. So before we go into who's in VAPI's crosshairs and who's going to potentially get run over in the future by VAPI, we're going to attempt a live demo, which I'm not sure is ever a great idea, but let's give it a whirl.
Thanks to you guys, I'm an IT genius, so don't worry, I have this.
Oh, you just gave us the thanks for it, so we'll take it.
Incredibly modest as well. Right, okay, so I'm going to hit talk to VAPI. There will be a few moments of silence, and then VAPI will start talking to us, and Andy will lead the conversation. When VAPI and Andy are talking, let's not make any noise, because it'll misinterpret that as an interruption and it'll stop talking. So let's Andy do his interaction, and then we will react to it when he's done.
Was that shut up, Stephen?
It was shut the fuck up. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to VAPI. I'm an assistant that you can talk to like a person. So, how's your day going?
Very good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. I'd love to dive into your questions. But before I do, would you mind telling me how you found out about VAPI?
Yeah, it was through a podcast.
Nice. Podcasts are a great way to discover cool stuff. So what do you want to know about VAPI?
I have a flunky sales team that are failing to sell my product, and I was thinking of replacing the entire lot of them with VAPI. Is VAPI Voice Agent good for outbound telesales?
Well, VAPI can definitely help in that area. It's designed for handling conversations, so it could make your outbound telesale smoother. Plus, with low latency, it can keep up with the back and forth of sales calls pretty well. Just think of it as your new sales rep who never needs a coffee break.
Or importantly, a wage rise.
Haha, true that. No wage increases needed either. Just a solid voice and some good programming, and you're set. Got any other questions about how it all works?
Yes, I do. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was, are you stuck with the pre-canned voices that you've already created? Or if I wanted to recreate the voice of one of my team members, potentially using a product like 11 Labs, is that something that you can accommodate?
Yeah, you can totally bring your own voice. If you want to recreate a team member's voice using something like 11 Labs, VAPI can accommodate that. So you can have a more personal touch to your sales calls. Pretty neat, right?
Yeah, real cool. How much does VAPI cost?
For pricing details, you can click on the contact sales button on the website and they'll help you out with that. But hey, it's free for up to 1,000 minutes a month. That's a good start.
Wow, that's really cool.
Right? It's a nice way to try it out without any pressure. Got any more questions or anything else you want to know?
Yeah, I was wondering what are top tips to reduce the latency? Because that's the things that really make these digital voices sound synthetic.
Good point. To reduce latency, you can focus on a few things. 1, optimize your network use, a strong and stable internet connection. 2, co-locate your servers. If you're hosting, keep your servers close to your users. 3, use efficient code. Make sure your code is optimized and lightweight. 4, leverage streaming. Use real-time streaming for audio, which VAPI does pretty well. Those things can definitely help keep the convo flowing smoothly.
Is your voice one of the pre-canned voices that I could use for outbound sales?
Yep. The voice you're hearing is a professional voice clone from 11 Labs, and you can use it for your outbound sales too. It's designed to sound natural, so it should work great for that.
Hi, VAPI. I've not got a great level of technical experience, though. Is this something I can easily integrate into my systems?
For sure. VAPI is designed to be user-friendly, even for those not super techie. You can integrate it with just a few steps using our web, iOS, or Python clients. Plus, there's documentation to help you out. You got this.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Glad I could help.
Okay, you can
think
stand
of
down.
anything else.
Yeah. Cheers, mate. Thanks.
Woo!
Coming to you live.
Pretty crazy stuff, right?
That is insane. Insane.
So I think that was like a 5 or 6 minute interaction. Never skipped a beat. Kept the conversation going all the way through.
And by the way, there's crazy customization over the voices themselves. You can speed them up. You can make them more monotone. You can make them more bubbly and enthusiastic. You've got complete configurability over the actual voice itself.
But 3 very different accents, or at least 2 twins and 1 different one, and it got them all without a single pause.
So let's finish by talking about who is going to be the roadkill that VAPI hits with a Mack truck at 120 miles an hour. So I pulled some stats on this. So to understand this, you need to have an understanding of the industries that are built on phone-based communications, in particular outbound calls. So you've got telesales and telemarketing, customer service and support, recruitment agencies, real estate and lettings, debt collection, and market research and surveys. Now, here's a stat for you. There are over 40 million people worldwide are employed in roles primarily involving outbound or scripted phone-based communication. In the US alone, 2 million people work in telesales or call center roles. In the UK alone, there is 1.3 million people in similar roles, sales, admin, support, all using scripted calls. Analysts predict that 30 to 50% of these roles could be augmented or replaced by AI voice agents within the next 5 years. If I had a fucking microphone, I'd drop it right now.
There's the other side of this, which terrifies me, which is lock up your mother. Because the other side of this is, could you imagine fraud? I mean, there's going to be a humongous problem. It's already a major problem with older people. There's going to have to be some way of working out how to protect the old against this type of system.
Yeah.
And then just another scenario, I was thinking about political campaigning. What if Nigel Farage's voice rang 10 million people in one day? Boris Johnson's voice, do you know what I mean? Like, these are all the things that will happen. Trump.
Yeah.
Oh, unbelievable stuff. Crazy.
So there you go. Incredible disruption coming down the line, guys. And my dystopic prediction, once again, that all of this stuff is horrible for job creation. I think it's incredibly destructive. And there's just another industry of 40 million people that could get disrupted to the tune of 30 to 40% in the next 5 years. So
Good night.
welcome to my dystopic future.
And these bedtime
Where
stories.
robots feed you that goop out the matrix that they sustain on.
It looks like porridge.
Yeah, before you go to your bed at night.
So let's bring it home on something more practical, more physical. And again, it's been a long weekend, so apologies if this is not quite
Ground
as
control
concise.
to Major Tom.
I was at a dinner during the week and I was listening to one of the chief execs at Weir Engineering, one of Glasgow's great businesses. And he said something that I thought, that can't be true. He said, Glasgow's a wonderful city on many, many grounds, but it's also one of the world's leading producers of satellites. And I went, no way.
No.
Yeah. So I went off and did a little bit of reading, and right enough, it is.
Wow.
So let me run you back a little bit. Outer spaces. I was actually I was standing at a stall a few years ago, speaking to young law graduates on behalf of the legal firm that I work with. And one young chap came up and said, what are you interested in? He says, I'd love to do space law. And I went, space law? Space law. And I laughed. And I thought, there is a space law. And there is. So basically, Outer Space Act 1986 was the kind of global legislation. So starting to look at how we regulate. And then the Space Industry Act of 2018. And that was kind of the core, the legal framework for space flight activities from UK soil, including Scotland. And it looks at licensing, regulation, launch, spaceflight accidents, environmental and safety standards. So we actually have space legislation. And
a very important question. Can you sue space aliens for mean tweets on X?
You can sue space aliens, but you have to find their address at which to serve the papers. And so it's really interesting. So we've got legislation, but do we have an industry? And actually, there is an industry which is at certain levels. So I think the statement wasn't quite correct. We have a bludgeoning space satellite industry in microsatellites. So effectively small cube satellites. I'll talk about that in a second. So we're the world leading centre for small satellite manufacture, and we build more small satellites than any other city in Europe, and we're second only to California.
Where? Who?
So there's a number of companies, I'll talk about that in a second, but it's really based, I think, around that very specific engineering niche that we have. And again, we are losing the war on AI over the weekend, speaking to teachers at various places.
100%.
There's no one at school has talked about anything other than, and we've talked about this before in the pod,
Education's
AI
nowhere on this whole
AI
thing.
is cheating.
Yeah.
But Scotland and Glasgow in particular, shipbuilding and motor vehicles has still got some fabulous engineering. So the engineering heritage, the universities and the AI, the tech, and some really pioneering companies. So we've got Clyde Space, which was a turning point. We then had Spire Global, Alba Orbital, all coming into the area. And like all these things, it becomes a feeder area. So you've got great supply line. You've got ability to get materials here. You've got academics around you to provide backup and research. And what we apparently are building up is an expertise in miniaturization. So we specialize in small satellites and cube satellites and pocket cubes. So they're basically small, cheap. So think a little bit, I suppose, like Starlink. It's these little satellites that you can launch quickly, cheaply, launch quick, fail quick.
In constellations.
Yeah. We've got government backing. So again, got to give some credit. Lots of times I criticise Scottish government, but we've been good at providing strategic backing. And they're looking at capturing a £4 billion share of the global market by 2030. And it's growing already at a staggering rate, 18-20% a year. We also are pretty well situated for launch. So there's a whole bunch of companies around Scotland. So we're close to water. We're at the right part of the planet to launch
I
things
thought
from.
we were too high up in the hemisphere. Does it not
No.
work best if you're around the equator? Kind of.
But there's other advantages that we seem to have by
Right.
being where we are.
Okay.
And we've got that integration. We've got some launch sites. We're also, I think, looking at very eco-friendly. So again, I know that we sometimes
Rockets and eco-friendly, is that two things that go in the same sentence?
and again, we're moving into a world where, America's going at a different pace because it's ignoring or choosing to overlook some of the eco issues around it. We seem to have a much more environmentally friendly policy. And as such, if we can do both, then we have a market. We're not going to be the world leaders, but we're finding a niche, we're finding a market.
Okay.
So, as I say, a number of companies I mentioned before, AAC Clyde Spaceport, they're in Glasgow, Spire Global, Glasgow, designing and operating one of the world's largest nanosatellite constellations.
Wow.
Alba Orbital, they do the ultra small pocket cubes. Orbex, developing first homegrown orbital rocket with a focus on sustainable low carbon launches.
Now, if you can get launches from the UK, that's a game changer.
Well, we've got 2 or 3 in Edinburgh. We've got Skyrora building innovative rockets for small satellites, and so it goes on and so it goes on. So I think what we're beginning to see is already an economic impact in Scotland, about 4 billion, but 8,500 jobs and growth. And I think ultimately it's nice to see that perhaps if we can double down, there is maybe some areas that we still have a real role to play. And what I also understand is we're good at downstream stuff. So we're good at getting materials. We've got the support system around us. And the other part of particularly these nanosatellites is beaming stuff down.
Yeah.
So we're very good at dealing with the data that's coming down and distributing it.
I don't think I would confuse the size of them with the volume, because from just a few kind of cursory searches, I think what is pretty clear is it's low volume, high value stuff solving very specific problems. So if you took Spire as an example, they're about wildfire detection, but they've launched 8 satellites this year. So now each satellite could be $100 million, but so I think it's low volume, high value, niche specific. Because I was thinking when you were talking, who's the customer for all this stuff? You know, who's buying these satellites to put them into space and for what?
So there you go.
In that example, it's probably a government or a state to do wildfire detection.
It's
from
definitely
space.
getting some wind in the sails. I was on LinkedIn the other day and I saw an advert for Entrepreneurial Spark, and it was joined the Entrepreneurial Spark Space Accelerator.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's for
And I think the
that
point of it
industry
is
specifically.
none of us would have expected us to be a major player. But what amazed me is that we are actually a player.
Yeah.
And, you know, there cannot be that many players in the world. And to have that technology and that nascent industry in and around Glasgow, it gives you some hope that there's
That we
a
have an
future for us.
export business
Some.
beyond
Not a lot.
antisocial behaviour.
You're such a pessimist.
Knife crime,
Totally.
antisocial behaviour, and rampant drug
Heart
consumption.
disease.
And tourism coming out your wazoo. I mean, as I said at the beginning of this,
If you're on that North Coast 500 route, you're
stop sending all your camper vans over. We're full.
there you go, guys.
We did it, Docket, episode 17 in the can. Are we done, or do we want to tackle one or two of those questions?
How are we
or
doing for
save
time?
them? We're 53 minutes in.
Let's do one of them.
One question. So I think.
Just the context is
Yes.
from the listener questions last week, we got through a bunch of them. There was a couple we never
There's a few
got
more
to,
come in
so
on
we're gonna
LinkedIn and
tackle one of them.
We'll tackle them. So one of the questions that came in was the kind of the HR side of dealing with the human resources and how AI is impacting, and how, if you're an HR manager, are you going to be able to deal with the people and productivity? You know, headcount used to be the big thing.
Metric.
How does
Revenue
AI,
by headcount, yeah.
How does AI and HR kind of tie in together? How do we deal with our people in an AI-based world?
I think Andy should take that first. I never had a lot of success with HR in my career. Anytime I was at HR, it was usually for bad reasons.
Well, let me think about that for a second. You've kind of sprung that on me and I've not had a lot of time to think about it. So I'm still, if I'm being 100% honest, I'm not 100% sure exactly the context and what the question's being asked in.
The way I see it is
HR's not really judging employees' productivity. I mean, they're there to stand over the employment process and bring compliance and standards. It's the employee's manager that's standing over their productivity. And then if they have problems with their productivity that can't be resolved, they then go to HR.
But you did mention something interesting at the end of that question, which was we do measure productivity in a lot of companies by that metric of revenue per employee. And maybe in a post-AI world, that's not actually a particularly good measurement. So what would there be like revenue per agent or something like that, or per
I think revenue per
token?
employee is but if a business is fundamentally utilizing AI properly, then what you should see, one of the indicators that it's working is you should
An increase
see
in revenue
significant increase in revenue per employee, because the short term opportunity of AI is do more with less, or at least do more with the same resources. It does make me think of a quote that the guy that runs Warren Buffett's insurance company, so Geico, is an Indian guy called Ajit. And at the investor conference, the Berkshire Hathaway investor conference that just came, the one where Warren retired, one of the questions that was posed by somebody in the audience was, in a world of autonomous driving, whereas Geico's in a world where they insure the driver for the risk that the driver represents, where there's no longer a driver, how does a Geico...
What does that mean for premiums?
How does Geico work?
Yeah.
How does the business continue to thrive and succeed in a world where there's no drivers to insure? And he said that we would insure the liability rather than the driver. And so when I think about HR's role and how AI could impact the relationship between HR and employees, I kind of think back to some research I did for the impending legal summit that we've got coming up in a few days. So Mishcon Derea, one of the big legal firms in the UK, have deployed AI into a kind of predictive analytics type setup where they'll predict ahead of time the outcome of litigation based on certain inputs. And apparently they've got extremely good at being able to predict the accuracy of that. What if HR, based on some inputs about the employee, was able to predict ahead of time the success or failure of any given employee?
I think there's also
And what information, what inputs would you need to make that prediction?
There's also a whole minefield, I think, around dealing with employees in a changing world. And again, I'm not going to have no expertise in it, but how do you actually enforce or assist or deal with employees in implementing AI? How do you deal with the questions around having to move employees sideways or into other roles around an AI-based business model? Because the whole business model is going to change.
The financial incentives will drive that change. It will make no sense at all anymore to have people in these more remediated roles. And so AI will, just for purely financial reasons, pick up the slack, and then you'll need to make a decision. Do you deploy that person into another part of the business? I've seen that done well, and I've seen it, but most of the time that doesn't tend to work out that well, by the way.
Here's my biggest concern is when it comes to HR and the interaction between HR and employees and where AI fits in the middle. I think the biggest role that HR can play in the short term is to make sure that companies don't fail the employees, rather the employees failing the company.
Yeah.
It might be perceived that some employees are not making the switch to AI fast enough, and that might put them in a performance review type situation, which might have them perfectly good people kicked out of the company. I think in businesses that don't have professional learning and development platforms or infrastructure, HR might need to bridge the gap to help provide the training, the support for employees to make that jump to the post-AI world. Or you might end up risking perfectly excellent employees that are just struggling to make the shift to AI, who have previously been extremely effective in the role, that now might find themselves in a performance
Paddy, it's worse than that. As you know, we had a perfectly excellent HR woman. Shout out Laura Rennie. And I'm literally thinking as I'm speaking here, so I haven't given this a lot of thought, But in the future, do you just interact with an AI voice agent that is connected to all the HR material, and then they actually guide you as the employer in terms of how to implement these things and communicate with your staff and resolve issues between staff? I mean, it's
the one I was going through my head was, used to be, or one of my solutions would have been, well, they're not so technical. Let's move them to a more people-facing role. But you just showed us VAPI, and that need to have that people-facing role, except at the highest level where you're dealing with technical issues, is suddenly gone. So you can't even take people and redeploy them to nice, pleasant phone voices because that's gone as well.
I think it all comes back to this underlying trend that we've talked about loads of times on the podcast. This is not going to be an optional skill set for anybody inside the business to develop, because there's not going to be any part of the business untouched by this trend. Therefore, you have no choice, literally no choice, but to figure out how to get on board with this and make the tools work for you, or you will be outcompeted by somebody who does.
As you said previously, Paddy, we'll finish on this. These things happen, what was it, a wee bit at a time and then all at once or something like that.
Yeah.
And you can already see online now, even unsophisticated users are using ChatGPT for almost all copy generation.
Growth is staggering.
The growth of
600 million daily active users.
Yeah. But for copy generation in particular on like LinkedIn and Facebook, I would say the majority of it that I see now is AI generated.
If I was 10 or 20 years younger, which would make me 75, I would literally be going out now, revving VAPI up and pointing it at a bunch of data and going out and creating all kinds of work, because it's like the issue so it's going to be the early adopters, the people that work out this stuff early and start using it for their business to generate whatever
that's why I think this concept of education leading to a 35-year career where you do a derivative of the same job, I think in the future people are going to have to think of careers as 12 to 36 months arbitrages, and a shit ton of them all the way through their working life, because nobody will be able to gain a super competitive advantage in most things for any length of time until the margin gets starched out of the opportunity.
And on that terrifying note,
Come on.
All right, episode 17.
In the can.
Well done, guys.
We have, we should probably disclose at this point, we've probably got a mixed 2 or 3 weeks coming up. We'll certainly be back next week, but I think week after, Stephen goes into his
touring mode.
Tour guide prime season, might be gone for a period of time. We will try and keep the momentum, but it might be a bit stop-start through the months of June and July.
Stephen, before we finish, initiate begging mode.
Please, 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 if you haven't done so. The only thing we ask, we don't ask for much, but please, 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 could you
send us money?
Send us money. or at least say nice things to us. Or could you like, subscribe, and share? It's all that we ever ask of you.
Or find us at our website. It's our least preferable option. Get us where you get your podcasts, or find us at the website at roundtablerethink.com. All right, that's it. We did it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good night, guys.